What a World Cup we just had, didn't we? We got a bit of everything. Great football, a few shocking early exits, some really pleasant surprises, and a new world champion, all of which caused a shake-up in the FIFA ranking. Now, as is usually the case with this table, there is criticism and some teams just don't seem to make any sense. That's why we will go step by step and game by game to understand how the results in the tournament shape this ranking. A detailed explanation on how the formula works and points are obtained can be found in the previous video of this channel, to which there is a link at the top. We had a few friendlies before the tournament and we've already included them here, so we start directly at the World Cup. Portugal started with a loss against the Netherlands, but since it was just 1-0, it cost them only 3 points. Then the win over Vietnam, and more importantly, the draw with the United States gave them lots of points to finish with a gain of 33 points despite their early exit. Belgium and Austria didn't play at the World Cup, so their points remain unchanged. South Korea had a bad run in the tournament. Their 2 defeats against 2 opponents lower than them cost them 83 points, and the draw with Germany gave them a good 19 points, but that's not enough to avoid a huge drop in points. Italy started off well with a win over Argentina, and then lost to Sweden, which was expected. What was not expected was to lose 5-0, and that cost them 14 points, because the more goals you lose by, the more points you will lose. And finally, the loss to South Africa, a game they were expected to win according to the formula, cost them 43 points. Iceland didn't play at the World Cup either, so their points also remain unchanged. China, the current Asian champions, lost to Denmark in their opening game, then beat Haiti 1-0, but the formula expected them to win at least 2-0, so they lose points despite winning the game. And in their last game, they were trashed by England, which cost them a further 13 points. Denmark beat China to get some big points, then lost to England and finally beat Haiti 2-0, which was the least they were expected to do, so their gain of points is minimum. Norway started with a loss to host New Zealand, then drew with Switzerland, which put them at risk of getting eliminated in the group stage. They did, however, beat Philippines 6-0 to advance to the knockout stages, but lost 34 points in the process. Japan beat Zambia 5-0 in their first game, which was the minimum score they needed to get points, then beat Costa Rica, and in the last game they also beat Spain 4-0, which gave them a huge amount of points, because that's what you get when you run over a top 10 team. Australia won their first game against Ireland, then lost to Nigeria, which cost them 46 points. That's what happens when you lose at the World Cup, at home, to a team much lower than you in the ranking. They did, however, recover some of that with a 4-0 win over Canada. They went through to the knockout stages but lost 18 points in the process. The Netherlands had a positive group stage, gaining points in all 3 games. Brazil was one of the biggest disappointments of the tournament. The defeat to France cost them 21 points, and in their last game only managed a draw against Jamaica, which took 26 points off them for a total loss of 46 points and an early flight back home. Another letdown was Canada. The draw with Nigeria and a 4-0 loss to Australia cost them 54 points, and they also headed home much earlier than anyone expected. Spain beat Costa Rica in the first game, and in the second they were expected to beat Zambia at least 6-0. But since they only, in quotation marks, won 5-0, the formula makes them lose points. Finally, their huge defeat to Japan cost them dearly. They qualified to the next round but lost 33 points overall. France lost a big amount of points for not beating Jamaica, then recovered them by beating Brazil, and in their last game they were expected to beat Panama by at least 4 goals, but the score was 6-3, so they lost points in that game. According to the formula, England were expected to beat Haiti at least 5-0 in their opening game, but only managed a 1-0 win, so they lost points. Then they won their next 2 games for a net gain of 15 points. Germany started well with a 6-0 win over Morocco to gain half a point, but then lost to Colombia to lose 42 points, and the draw with South Korea cost them 18 points. They ended up with minus 60 and went home much earlier than anyone would have guessed. Sweden started losing points despite beating South Africa because the formula expected them to win by at least 5 goals, but then went on to win their next 2 games. The United States won their first game against Vietnam, as the formula expected, but then only managed draws against the Netherlands and Portugal, the latter being more costly. The title holders went through, losing 30 points in total. Rearranging the table after the group stage, we get this. The United States started the tournament 39 points clear of Sweden at the top, and even though they retained their place, that gap disappeared. Germany dropped from 3rd to 6th, while the Dutch climbed from 9th to 5th and Japan from 11th to 8th. Now let's move on to the knockout stages. The most interesting part of this is that, unlike the men's ranking, here losses in these rounds do make you lose points. Australia beat Denmark and gained 14 points, while the Danish lost that amount. In wins and losses, one team's gain is another team's loss. Same case with Japan with their win over Norway. Spain got 12 points with their hammering over Switzerland. The Netherlands were expected to beat Nigeria by at least a 3-goal difference, but only managed a 2-0 win and lost 1 point according to the formula, while France got less than half a point despite beating Morocco 4-0. Now come one of the things that just sound wrong with this formula. England beat Nigeria on penalties, but lost a huge amount of points because the formula expected them to win by at least 2 goals in 90 minutes. Essentially, what FIFA and the formula are saying here is, yes, you won, but not in the way I expected you to do it, so I punish you by taking points off you. That just sounds wrong. Finally, Sweden, with a fantastic performance by goalkeeper Musovic, beat the United States dramatically by the smallest of margins. Literally. With that, the United States lost 8 points and the Swedish gained 4. Rearranging, the US lose the lead, which is now in the hands of Sweden. Getting into the quarterfinals, Australia beat France in a dramatic penalty shootout and won 3 points, while Le Bleu lost 6. Japan lost to Sweden, which produced an exchange of 13 points. Spain beat the Netherlands with a heroic performance by teenager Sara Parayuelo, and that caused an exchange of 15 points. Finally, England beat Colombia 2-1 to gain 0.2 of a point. Once we rearrange everything, we see that Sweden extended their lead in the ranking. In the semifinals, Spain beat Sweden to gain 26 points, again with a great performance from Parayuelo. Now, at this point, without moving the bars, we can see that with that result, the United States momentarily regained the lead of the ranking, despite being already out of the tournament. That was until the very next day, when England defeated Australia to gain 25 points and take the lead of the table. In the third place match, Sweden beat Australia 2-0 to get 21 points and get on the podium. And in the final, with a goal by Olga Carmona, Spain became the new world champions by beating England, which gave them 23 points. One final rearrangement, and this is why the FIFA ranking looks the way it does after the World Cup. Sweden are the new leaders, and it's the first time in the 20 years since the creation of this ranking that a country other than the United States or Germany occupied the top spot. Of course, this ranking always raises lots of criticism and controversy, and the main one this time will undoubtedly be, why are the world champions not leading the table? That's because, as we've seen, the ranking doesn't sort teams according to their positions in a tournament, but by how many points they gain or lose game by game. It is also interesting to see that Australia reached the semifinals and finished 4th overall, but they lost 1 place in the ranking, which will certainly raise some eyebrows. But if we look at the results one by one, we will hopefully understand why. The Matildas lost 3 of their 7 games, and that alone cost them 92 points. They beat Ireland, a team lower than them, and France on penalties, which are scenarios that don't give many points. So the only 2 games where they got a huge amount of points were against Canada and Denmark. Now, as we discussed in our previous video, playing at home has many advantages, but for the purpose of the ranking, it can be a handicap, as wins at your own ground will give you fewer points, but defeats will be more costly. African nations had a great performance in this tournament, and that is reflected on the ranking. Nigeria, Morocco, and South Africa are the teams that gained the most points during the tournament and climbed the most positions. Morocco got 92 points thanks to their wins over Colombia and South Korea. They lost to Germany and France, but that was expected according to the formula, so they're not penalized too much for that. It must also be noted that their good performance also extended to their pre-World Cup friendlies, where they collected good points in their draws away to Italy and Switzerland. In total, the Atlas Lionesses are the team that gained the most points during the summer with 104 and climbed an impressive and deserved 14 places. Nigeria gained points in all their matches. A draw with Canada in the opening game and an impressive win over host Australia got them a huge amount of points. In the round of 16 against England, the expected result was a 2-0 loss in 90 minutes, but they managed to take it all the way to penalties, so they did much better than the formula expected and thus gained lots of points. In total, Nigeria climbed 8 positions. South Africa also outperformed the formula. They were expected to lose 5-0 to Sweden, but they managed to keep the score 2-1, which gave them points. They were also expected to lose to Argentina, but managed a draw, and their historic win over Italy gave them 43 points. In the round of 16 against the Netherlands, the formula expected them to lose by at least 3 goals, but they kept it 2-0 and thus got another point. Overall, they climbed a deserved 9 positions. Finally, Zambia also left a good impression this summer. They lost the first 2 World Cup games to Japan and Spain, but again, since they were considered far superior opponents, they just lost less than a point against Japan and actually gained a 10 against Spain, since they were expected to lose 6-0, but the game finished 5-0. It was really the win over Costa Rica that helped them climb in the rankings. Moreover, they also had a great run in the pre-World Cup friendlies, a narrow loss to Ireland, a draw with Switzerland, and most importantly, a win over Germany in Germany all contributed to their rise. The last topic I want to discuss regarding the World Cup is the fact that sometimes the formula seems really unbalanced. As we've seen, when according to the formula there's a really unexpected result, lots of points will be given, like when Nigeria beat Australia or South Africa beat Italy, just to name a few. At this World Cup, we had games with exchanges of more than 40 points. But when top teams like England, Sweden or Germany face teams much lower in the ranking, they are required by the formula to ruthlessly hammer them to get 1 point or sometimes even less than that. At this World Cup, these were the minimum scores that these teams had to get to gain these points. As we can see, we're talking about having to win 5-0 or 6-0 to get half a point, and if they don't, they get penalized. Now, Japan and Germany did it and got their points. However, Spain were required to beat Zambia at least 6-0, but because they only won 5-0, the formula takes points off them. England and Sweden won by even smaller margins required by the formula and thus lost more points. Of course, there's a case to be made here that top teams shouldn't get too many points when facing lower opponents, because that will also be unfair, and I agree with that. We're not giving Spain 40 points for beating Zambia. My point here is that the formula demands a lot from them for very little reward. Essentially, what the formula is saying is, listen, you want to get half a point, you gotta win at least 6-0, and if you don't, you're losing points. There is very little to gain and too much to lose, and I think there is room for improvement for that in the formula. Finally, Mexico won the gold medal at the Central American and Caribbean Games, a competition I originally considered in my calculation despite it being a regional minor tournament, but where teams can compete with their senior squads. The reason I included it is because earlier this year, the Southeast Asian Games, another regional tournament, was indeed included. However, when FIFA released their official update, Mexico and all the other teams that participated had no change in their points, meaning that the tournament did not count. Why one tournament was included but the other wasn't is still unclear at the time this video is being made. As usual, if you like this video and you find it informative and useful, I would be very grateful if you share it and visit our social media and website.